All right, so this is a SImpson 260 analog VOM meter, voltage, ohms, and ammeter. So when you look at the screen here, okay, again, this is an analog meter, and so you can see there's some different colors there, and it has we can get it to focus in here. You can see kind of up there in the top, up there near the top here, it says DC. So this is like a DC scale, but there's actually a couple of different scales. And then there's the AC scale, and there's also the resistance scale. And as you go along this, the values get further and further apart. So if you look at the very top is for resistance. All right. So to use this, there's different connections here, similar to DMM. When you're wiring it up for ammeters, for instance, you have a couple of different jacks that you would wire it into. There's a little knob here that says 0 ohms. So if you're trying to measure resistance, that little knob right there says 0 ohms. You have to make sure this knob here, the first thing you have to do to measure resistance is zero out your meter reading. Right? So you need to make sure you connect to the correct terminals. Now there's a common terminal down here in the left corner for that you put the ground or the black lead in. No matter what you're doing, you always would use that. But if you were measuring current, if you're going to measure current, you would use one of these two depending on your current. If you're going to measure 1,000 volts, so you can actually use these to measure like 1,000 volts, but you need to make sure that you plug it in to the connection for 1,000 volts. For resistance, we're just going to plug it into the plus down here. So we have our black connection and our red lead connected in here. And so what I've got is I'm just going to connect this up, and I'm just going to short the two leads together, and I'm going to turn it on. So I'm going to flip it into the on position, and I'm going to flip it over to read resistance. And you see that red needle, as I turned that on, that red needle, when I went into resistance mode, that red needle went over to 0 because the leads are shorted out. Now as you adjust this knob, you see that that needle will move. So you want to move, you need to connect the leads and 0 this out. Otherwise it's not going to be accurate. Now if you change, this is the R equals 10,000 scale down at the very bottom. It's hard to read there, but it's R equals 10,000. And if you flip that over, that's R equals 1,000. And that meter will move on you when it does that. So you need to re-zero it every time you change a scale. All right, so then when I go down to the R times 1 scale, you see the lead is there, the R times 1 scale, the meter now is not at 0 anymore, it's way off. So again, you have to adjust it till it reads 0. All right. And so now I could read a meter, so I've got a 220 ohm resistor here. I'm going to connect up my 220 ohm resistor. All right, so I've connected the leads here to this 220 ohm resistor. Remember, resistors, it doesn't matter which one gets the positive lead or the negative lead. All right, and so now when you read this, we're on the times 1 scale. So in the times 1 scale there, it's reading, the needle is reading way over to the right. Okay, but if I change now to the times 100 scale, it's reading over here on this side. All right, but I didn't zero it. So when I change that, I need to put these back, and you see that the needle is reading way past 0 now because I zeroed it for the one-time scale. So you always got to short those leads together and zero that in, and then go back and connect it. So now that you can see there's 200, so it's reading 200 and just a little past the 200. Well, it's a 220 resistor, so of course it's going to be past the 2. One thing about analog meters, you can't read nearly as accurate as you can with a digital meter. All right, so now I'm going to flip over to a 470 ohm resistor, and it's the same scale. It's still in the 100 range, so you can see that that is reading. You can see the meter moved there, okay, and so it's now reading right along there, which is right below the 5. So this first number here that showed was a 2, but this is a 5. And so the scale, especially the resistance scale, is in nowhere linear. All right. And so when you look way over here, you get to infinity. So if you have it disconnected, you see the needle goes all the way over to the left, which is for resistance is infinity, meaning open circuit. Okay. So you have to you have to pay a lot of attention using a analog meter, especially when you're measuring resistance. Okay. Now, if you want to measure voltage, then you would flip the switch over to voltage, and then you would turn it on to plus DC if you're reading DC, or if you're reading AC, you would flip it over to the AC position.